Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at our annual Crisis Management Forum. Today we have two panelists with us. Our moderator is Steve Metzer. He is our associate editor. We also have with us Vic Albert. He is a shareholder with Ogletree Deakins. Vic's practice focuses on all aspects of trial law with particular experience in the areas of labor and employment trials, insurance, defense, bad faith trials, and trucking defense trials. He has tried a jury verdict over 60 cases in state and federal courts in Oklahoma. In the past 15 years, he has developed an employer-based practice advising employers in policy development, training, hiring, and firing, and investigation of employee complaints. We also have with us today Timothy Fawcett. He is the Director of Cybersecurity Consulting at Guernsey. Tim Fawcett is a managing consultant and the Director of Cybersecurity Consulting at Guernsey. Founded in 1928, Guernsey is a comprehensive professional consulting firm offering architecture, engineering, and consulting services across the globe. The cybersecurity practice assists clients in securing their environments through controls. Tim was selected and trained to be one of 100 level 1-C CMMC provisional assessors. Provisional assessors will be selected to perform some of the first assessments and are tasked with providing feedback for improving an assessment process. Guernsey has been selected to be an official third-party assessor organization allowed to perform assessments up to CMMC level 3. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Steve Metzer.
Well, thank you very much. I thought we'd just try to keep our conversation very casual, and so if you want to jump in anytime and talk about anything that gets on your mind, I'd appreciate that. But I thought maybe we'd just start by talking about planning ahead for different kinds of crisis. Lots of people in Oklahoma, I think, are very well aware of the need to plan for things like weather disasters. Tornadoes are very much a fact of life in Oklahoma, and things like ice storms. So businesses and individuals know to plan ahead, but the world has changed these days. There's a lot more going on, a lot more to be afraid of. I think the idea of cyber terrorism is something that's foreign to people, and it scares a lot of businesses. They don't know what to do to prepare. And this whole business with COVID has been very difficult for a lot of businesses to manage. So I thought maybe we could just start by you guys talking a little bit about the need to plan ahead, just in general terms, whether or not it's okay for a business to play it by ear these days, or if you need to have a very detailed plan or something in between. But Mr. Fawcett, would you like to just kind of take off on that idea, the notion of planning ahead and how important that is?
I can give some pretty good examples. We do a lot of work with different law firms, and what they'll do is they'll call us up and say, hey, we have this company, they got their email hacked, and they came in and did a wire transfer, and they stole $500,000. Can you come in and help us with that? Of course, we come in. They haven't collected any logs. They haven't done a lot of the stuff they need to do for us to be able to rebuild what happened. There's very little we can tell them from a cybersecurity standpoint other than, if you had a time machine, you can go back and fix these problems, but let's figure out how to fix this thing going forward. We usually find that it's something pretty simple, that if you had taken the time and asked the right people, we would have told you, turn this on, turn on this multi-factor, change your passwords, train your people. Those things are going to prevent some of the worst things to happen. It's not going to be a foolproof thing, but oftentimes just good controls will prevent the bad things from happening.
I want to ask you what a multi-factor is, but let's let Vic talk a little bit about your thoughts on planning ahead, just in general terms.
Sure. And from the employment law perspective, we deal a lot of times with working with companies and business owners on what they need to do to put in place to protect their greatest assets. For any business or any company, the greatest assets are the people that do the work and then the customers who provide the need for the work or provide the work to be done. And so we help companies with putting in place the policy, the training, the uniform enforcement, the fair enforcement of those policies with their employees so that they can provide the best service possible for their customers, much like Tim has talked about. And so, you know, it really starts with that group of the leaders of the company deciding these are the important things for us. This is what we need. And then sitting down with a professional and working up some policies, some guidelines, and some training programs with employees. And we see this a lot of times in the area of cybersecurity. You know, there's the need to develop a policy. I don't care if you're a 5-person workshop or a 500,000 person workshop. You have people that are bringing information and bringing contacts into your workplace through your electronic devices, through their phones, through their laptops, through their computers. They are just one click away from jeopardizing so many assets of the company. And so companies need to have a policy. They need to consult with a professional and put together the right policy in the right timing and then train employees on it and then enforce it. So very, very vitally important to have a plan with all of the very important aspects of your company, particularly cybersecurity.
Okay. Of course, there's lots of big news these days, but COVID-19 has changed a lot of realities for a lot of people and a lot of businesses, and people that had never heard of a pandemic before or thought about having to deal with one are now having to react to it. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about specifics that businesses have had to address for such things as mask mandates. And one of the questions that I thought I would ask Vic is if it's okay for employers to mandate vaccines for employees or bar customers that might want to come in that can't prove that they were vaccinated. Is it legal to do that, or how should they plan ahead for mandates like that?
So people just need to be informed, and you need to know that when you are dealing with a private company, so not owned by a governmental entity because that's a whole different category. When you're dealing with a private company, that private company is allowed to set the requirements for its workplace. It's allowed to set the requirements for its customer base. So for instance, my favorite football team, University of Oklahoma, is going down to play Tulane University on September 4th. I've read that Tulane University, as a private educational institution, has put in place a requirement that everybody attending the football game has to show proof of vaccination. Now, we can debate whether that's right or wrong, and there's going to be different people on different sides of that. But the point is, as a private institution, Tulane University is entitled to make that requirement. So if any Sooner fans are planning to go to the game, I hope you'll get your vaccination because you won't be allowed in. I've also heard that other sports teams are doing this. The Las Vegas Raiders, they are going to require vaccination before you can enter. Now, if you haven't had a vaccination, they'll give you one on the spot and let you enter. But they're doing that to encourage vaccinations. Can they do that? Yes, because they're a privately held company and they're entitled to do that. My own employer, Ogletree Deakins Law Firm, this week went to a mandatory vaccination policy. And so all of our employees nationwide, in our 48 offices nationwide, must be vaccinated or get an accommodation, either a medical accommodation or religious accommodation that's approved by a committee before we can continue with coming onto the workplace and doing the work that we do. It's got a lot of different aspects to it. I won't go into all those, but the point is simply this. When you go to work for a private company and that company makes workplace rules, you've got to follow those rules. When you go to an entertainment like a movie or a football game and that private company has made rules, you've got to abide by those rules to go in. You'll see a lot of the retail industry is going to go to mask mandates. You must wear a mask. Currently in Oklahoma, I see that most places encourage a mask but don't require it. Very easily, we can get back to a situation where retail outlets are going to require masks, and you will be required to wear a mask to go in and shop there. This is just the way it goes when you're dealing with a private company and a private employer. They are entitled to set those rules. Now, when you deal with a government, it's going to be what government are you dealing with? Because in Oklahoma, we see very different approaches. The federal government is pretty much going to go with the full extent of what they can do. So there are still currently mask mandates in federal office buildings and federal courthouses in Oklahoma. Then you get outside of that, and in your state buildings, the state capitol, there's no such thing. You get to your city governments, and I think you'll see that this fall there may very well be mask mandates that come back for city buildings in Oklahoma City and Tulsa because of the rising numbers. The point there is simply that our government officials are entitled to set those requirements, and people that are coming onto those premises are required to adhere to them. There's going to be people that don't like it one way or the other, but the point is simply private entities and governmental entities have the authority and the power to make rules and regulations that apply to their premises.
Okay. It occurs to me to ask if what you've been talking about has been challenged in court, and if the courts have more or less backed up what you're saying in different parts of the country and in different courts?
So there have been challenges. You've read about some of them. There was a challenge earlier this year when an Oklahoma County district judge was called upon to determine whether or not there could be a closing time for bars in Oklahoma City. And it was determined that ultimately that law was not properly based and would not be enforced against the entertainment places, bars and restaurants that wanted to stay open past 11 o'clock just to serve alcohol. So there have been some challenges already. Next week, an Oklahoma County district judge will be called upon to decide whether the no mask mandate that has been passed as state law, meaning that schools cannot require masks to be worn on school property, that has been passed as a state law. But the Oklahoma City School District and some other school districts have decided to challenge that and to require masks on school property. And so that issue has been reduced to a lawsuit, and next week an Oklahoma County district judge will hear argument in that case and then probably make a decision. What I see both in Oklahoma and nationally is that the medicine and the health aspects tends to drive whatever is presented to the court. In that first case, the proponents of the law that wanted bars to close at 11 o'clock could not provide actual medical proof that there was a need, a health need to close bars and close restaurants that serve alcohol at 11 o'clock. And so that was kind of the rise and fall in my understanding of where that decision came from. I think you'll see the same thing when these other laws are challenged. I read last week that when the Oklahoma City schools opened on the first day, there were just 4 cases of reported COVID among the students and the teachers and the staff. It was only about 3 days until that number had risen to about 120. And so I think you'll see that in any judicial forum, any legal forum, that there's going to be a lot of reliance on what medical science is saying. And so the proponents of either side of the issue are going to need to provide to the court what the medical science and the health need is, because that's really what's going to drive the decision.
Okay. Maybe we can get Mr. Fawcett in on the conversation as well, but I wondered about what employers might do to accommodate employees who have religious reasons or medical reasons which make it impossible for them to be vaccinated. And then to go on with this legal question, if a person objects to working alongside someone who has not been vaccinated, what kind of accommodations can an employer make for that person?
Well, from a technology standpoint, COVID's actually progressed our technology 10 years, maybe 15 years, with the adoption of it. There's also problems that come along with that, along with putting things in other people's computers. It's also called the cloud. And there's, but we have the abilities that allow people to work outside, and I think we've proven that that's the case. I don't know if there's a cybersecurity aspect to it, but I can tell you that there's some occasions when being in a room together makes better sense. If you're trying to collaborate, the technology is just not quite there. If you're building a building, it's really good to be in there with working things out. But I did want to bring up something that I did think of when you said, I think it's somewhat unrelated, but you said there's these people who have these reasons they can't be vaccinated. Same thing with cybersecurity. We have a lot of these rules we want to put on people. You can't change your password. And sometimes you can't have certain operating systems. But I like what you said about you have a committee that says, here's the exception. Same thing there. What are the accommodations? So if I can come back and I say, okay, I have this unsecure computer, it has to be on my network. What are my rules? If I'm going to be there and I'm going to be unvaccinated, what are the rules? What are the expectations for everybody involved? Do I need to have those people work in a different office? Do I need to have a computer that I can only access from certain places? Those are all the things that we have to think about, and you have to think about those things ahead of time. That's what that committee's job is. It's not just say, okay, it's going to be okay, and here's the alternatives. Here's what needs to happen. So I don't know. I can't tell you what the answer is on the legal side or on the HR side. I can tell you on the IT security side what those questions are. But the idea that is a risk, we mitigate the risk appropriately.
Okay. You want to talk a little bit about that, and especially about what you can say to me if I feel uncomfortable going back to work and knowing that one of my coworkers has not been vaccinated or refuses to wear a mask, or both?
So again, it comes down to planning, and it comes down to being as fair as you can with the policy for your workplace. Now, we have different types of industry and we have different types of workplace. And so as an employment lawyer, we deal with all of this. You've got the oil and gas industry, you've got people out in the oil field doing things, you've got the manufacturing industry, so you've got people standing next to each other in a manufacturing environment that are working together very closely. You've got the professional industries, the banking industry, you've got the medical industry. So you have different industries, and there's not a one-size-fits-all for everyone. We do have this whole mixture of things going on right now in our society where people have worked remotely and their employers want them to come back to the workplace because there is some collaboration that gets lost when everybody's working remotely and trying to connect by technology to have meetings and things. And so you have a lot of employers that want to bring their employees back to the workplace, but they want to do so safely. And then you have in Oklahoma, we only have a 50% vaccination rate. So for any workplace, you've got about 50% of your people that have not been vaccinated. So then on that, you have the people who've not been vaccinated who want to come back to the workplace. You have the people who've been vaccinated that express some concern about being in a workplace with unvaccinated people. But again, it comes down to what you can hear from the doctors and the medical scientists. Just because you're vaccinated does not mean that you won't get COVID. It does not mean that you can't pass COVID on to somebody. Vaccination, as you read, even in the Journal Record yesterday, this story from the healthcare professionals that got together and made a plea to the public to get vaccinated. Vaccinated people can still get COVID. They just won't get it as badly. The chances of ending up in the hospital and in the ICU if you've had a vaccination are very, very low. People can still get it. They can still pass it on to other people. So that's one of the misnomers. A lot of people think, well, I've had the vaccination, so I should just get to come to work and not have to wear a face mask or not have to do social distancing. That's not true. Employers need to look at that issue. In our workplace, we have a rule that if you're in a common area, so you go to the break room to get some coffee, you go to the copy room to make a copy, you have to put a face covering on. It's just, you need to do that. And so we do that, we enforce that. Now, when I go in my individual office that I can close the door, yes, I can take my mask off. But if I'm in a meeting with somebody in my office, then I need to put my mask back on. Again, it's just a matter of deciding what is safest for the workplace, putting the rules out there, making sure that the rules are enforced uniformly, and then if there's going to be exceptions to the rules, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's vaccinations, whether it's anything else to do with this pandemic, just make sure that you are doing so fairly and uniformly. Don't allow those things to let supervisors pick their favorites, to not enforce the rules, and their least favorites to enforce the rules. It just needs to be fair with everybody. So it simply goes back to look at the medical science, look at your work situation, consult with the experts, and then put the right systems in place.
In Oklahoma, people are generally opposed to big government and government intervention, but I wondered if you think that the world might be a simpler place if the federal government did just say exactly what you just said and made it sort of a mandatory position across the country that employers would require masks and would require vaccines.
Ooh, that's a big one.
So you step into that one.
Yeah. Well, so currently, I saw a recent nationwide study that only about 7% of employers have gone to mandatory vaccines. I think that number will increase through this fall as we're dealing with this Delta variant. I think it will increase as we're seeing from medical science that some of the effectiveness of the vaccines wears off after about 6 months or 8 months. And so the booster shots are being talked about now. And so, you know, because there's still so much we don't know about the medical part of this, it's very, very difficult to get on board with the federal government coming in with mandatory vaccinations and even mandatory face coverings. I mean, there needs to be the right balance, and it is very difficult to try to bring everybody on board with one set of rules. Now, I think there again, the more that we can listen to the medical professionals and less to the politicians, the better off we will be. And so I am guided when I look locally at what the Oklahoma medical officials are telling me. So the people that get on the news and give me the medical updates. And I've subscribed to the Oklahoma State Medical Department's updates, daily updates on COVID numbers and COVID precautions, because that's where I feel best informed. And then frankly, talking to my own doctors that I know and trust. What should we do about this? What should I do about this? What should I ask my family to do about that? I think still to be guided, the medical professionals are our best source of information.
Just briefly, do you know what the Department of Defense's policy is for making vaccines mandatory for military members?
So I don't believe they've done that. Now I could be wrong and I could be corrected on that, but I don't believe that they've done that.
I don't think they have.
Last I heard, they have not, because I'm a former Marine, so I follow some of these things, and there's the enlisted guys don't want to do it, which is crazy because the first thing you do when you show up to boot camp is they pump like 10 pounds of vaccines into you. Right. So it's just really one more, but I guess because it's not officially approved.
The last thing we need is for all these guys that are and women that are in Afghanistan to get sick and not be able to accomplish their mission. But anyway, that's kind of going in off the script a little bit. One more thing, talking about the pandemic topic. let's talk a little bit about remote work, and what can you say about compelling someone to return to work to an office or wherever if they desire to continue working at home? You want to let Mr. Fawcett jump off on that just briefly?
From a cybersecurity standpoint, I think we can make people secure regardless of where they are. In fact, I would make the statement of saying that people working from remotely may, in this new world, might actually have a better approach to security than internally. Probably 10, 15 years ago, the thought of I'm inside my firewall and my internal network and everything's safe, I think we're proving is really a misnomer. More and more things are going out to the cloud, and people are accessing them from the internet. And not only that, we have the soft, unsecured internal networks that tend to get wiped out by ransomware all the time. So I don't think that cybersecurity is a good reason to say you had to be in the office. That's probably the complete opposite, if you're doing things right. But
what about in other industries? Do people have a good argument saying I've been doing my work at home and it's been working well for more than a year now?
I can tell you, my job, if I don't do it, it becomes very apparent very quickly. You know, I'm a consultant, so I do work. I bill for it. Mm-hmm. And if the money doesn't come in, obviously I'm not doing my work. There's other jobs that, same thing, probably attorneys the same way. But if I'm putting, things in boxes over at a warehouse, obviously that's not something I can do. So there's certain jobs that require to be there. There's other jobs that need to be supervised a little bit better. But I've had a lot of experience with call centers. I worked in the rental car business for a lot of years, and I work for electric companies who all have call centers. And when I first started my career, it was you're all going to sit in this big circle, and there's going to be a person in the middle monitoring the phone calls. And within a matter of 5 or 6 years, that all got moved to people's homes, and they set them up, and they're able to do it that way. And so, as technology advances, you can certainly make accommodations for people, and it's cost effective in a lot of ways too. Mm-hmm. But I think there's just some jobs you're just going to have to show up. I mean,
can employees be compelled to show up if they've been working effectively at home?
So again, the employer is entitled to set the workplace rules and the workplace expectations. Now, if an employee has a medical disability or a medical reason that needs to be accommodated or the job modified to allow them to work at home, that's kind of its own different story, and again falls into the employer having the right policies and the right review committee or review persons to make sure that that's allowed fairly. But we do see a lot of employers in the last few months that have talked to us about we are ready to bring our employees back into the workplace, especially in your professional type settings, banking, insurance, those kind of things, where some people might have done some things remotely, but now they want people back in the workplace because of the collaboration, because of the communication, because it just makes things more productive in that employer's mindset. And an employer is entitled to require employees to come back to the workplace unless there is a documented disability or documented health concern that would keep them out. Now, we have recently had some issues with school districts that required students to do some remote learning. And so you had last spring a lot of the school districts that had these split schedules. Students would come on Monday, Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday, and half the day Wednesday, and then half the day Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They would alternate being at school and at home. Well, that meant that some employees needed to be home to be with their children during that time. So again, that's different than a disability, but that's another reason that employers needed to be flexible with some remote working situations. To my knowledge, almost all of the school districts in Oklahoma have opened up with in-person learning. There have been some that have shifted just in the last week to certain grades or certain classes staying home because of COVID outbreaks, but that's viewed as a temporary situation. So the point there is parents employees that are parents are going to have some issues and some needs to be at home, and employers have worked with this already. And so employers need to take the lessons learned and work with this to anticipate what the future needs are going to be, and then work with their employees in that regard. I read something interesting the other day that the old-fashioned snow day is a thing of the past, because through technology, we've now learned that students can engage in learning even though they're at home. And so some schools are envisioning no more snow days, because when we have to close because students can't get to school, we'll just shift to a learning from home environment or a working from home environment. And so that's going to mean the same thing for employees. Employees will need to be home with their children during that time. So employers need to anticipate that and be ready for that, and just be ready to meet that need when it comes. But employers can require employees to come back to work. Employers can also require employees to work remotely. So the employer gets to set the place and the terms and conditions of employment, and as long as there aren't medical issues or disability issues or things like that that are being compromised, that will stand.
If anything positive comes of all this, I think it will be that employers and government and people in general discover that they have a lot more flexibility to get things done in different ways, and that the future, I don't think, will ever be the same as it was in the past. There's going to be more of a hybrid type approach to a lot of things, and that's kind of exciting to think about, really.
Well, it's definitely certainly a bigger push to get broadband out everywhere.
Yeah.
If the requirement's going to be that all students have to have the option to work from home, then there's going to be a requirement that all students have access to high-speed internet.
Yeah, and the way we were talking earlier about if you have a government contract, you used to have to be pretty much in the city or at the installation where that contract was, but in the future you might be able to work in Cement, Oklahoma, and do a contract work in Dallas-Fort Worth. If we can just transition just a little bit or a lot to the cybersecurity part of our conversation, I'd appreciate that. Mr. Fawcett, if you had to offer me or people in general just a single piece of advice about how to prepare to be secure online in the future, what would your advice be?
I would probably say, from an individual standpoint, not a company, if you just how to keep yourself safe online, probably two things, but I'll just start with the one. One of them is going to be that you use a password vault, like LastPass, or there's a couple of other ones out there. What they do is they will actually, when you go out to the internet and you go to create a password for that website, it creates an individual, very long, very complicated password for that website. And then all you have to do is remember the one password, and it saves it for you. And the reason that's important is because if I use the same password, and why not? Because at work they make me make this really great long password with special characters, and I like it, I've memorized it, so I just start using that everywhere. And unfortunately, I use it at some website, let's say it's Facebook or whatever, and that Facebook is hacked. Now they know that here's my email address, here's this password. They're just going to start trying that password on all and they know, that you also work here, and that they know all this information. So by using a tool like this, you can have a different password everywhere, and if it got compromised, it doesn't compromise all your accounts. So that would be my number one advice. Or they're generally free, but even a paid one will probably pay dividends. The second thing I would also recommend to anybody individually, especially on your social media accounts, if you have the option to do that multi-factor, I'll explain to you what that is. That's where if you had to get that text message, when you log on from someplace new, or you had to go onto your phone and type in the code. Most places like Facebook, Google, things like that, they'll have that option, and you'll have to turn it on. They're always telling you to do it. Every time you turn it on, it's like, did you know this will happen? It's a good idea, because I tell you, I have it on all my accounts, and every so often I'll get the little pop-up, and are you in trying to log on from Afghanistan?
Right,
I'm like, no. I can go in there and protect my account that way. So, and that's also really good advice for companies as well.
Just to talk a little bit about company security, can you talk a little bit about firewalls and what they represent, and if a company's invested a lot in their system firewall, is that pretty much all they need to do, or are there other things that they need to bear in mind?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the world's changed. You're not usually, oftentimes, not all of your data is actually inside your network anymore. So firewall is it's a device that sits on your network edge, and you have your internal network. So you're sitting at your desk, and you go out to the internet. It goes through that internet portal.
VPN type.
Right. So, or you VPN into it if you want to get back into your network. But there's lots of things. So, like if I'm going to get my email, and if I'm Office 365, I'm not going through my corporate account. The other thing to consider, and there's ways around this, but if I'm even on my network and I'm going out to a website and everybody tells you, make sure you have a lock on the top of your screen. Well, what that means is it's being encrypted between your desktop and the internet. So that firewall is not able to look at that. It's all encrypted traffic. So the days of saying, oh, we got a great firewall, we're having great intrusion detection, while they're important, they're becoming less and less of a fail-safe because everybody's working out in different places. They're putting things in cloud computing and getting their email from the internet. And so now, instead of having one entry in this firewall, you have entries into your data, whether it's your network, it's your data. You have entryways into it all over the place. And companies don't always know where all those things are. You would think you would, but I go in lots of times and we'll ask, where's your data? And so you actually had to go and ask, let's go to HR. Where do you keep your data? Oh, we use this service over here. And I go over to the operations folks, and where do you keep your data? Well, we use this service over here, and and all our data goes up to there, and then we pull it back down. It's not necessarily something that IT necessarily knows, and it needs to be thought out and understood, and somebody needs to know about it and then make sure those things are protected. So, but to answer your question, I don't necessarily think that the firewall, you had to have one, but it's not
not a fail-safe.
That's not, people used to say, oh, I got my firewall, I'm good. I wouldn't say that these days.
Just to go off script a little bit, we hear so much about Russia especially, but even like in Africa, there's a lot of hacking going on, cyber terror, cyber espionage. And I think Americans might be concerned that there's some kind of expertise or sophistication that they have overseas that we don't have here. Is that the case, or do we have that same capability to stir up trouble, or do we understand what they're doing necessarily?
We certainly do, and I can tell you that for the most part, we have state-sponsored terrorism, and we have that. But the main motivation for a lot of these ransomware ones is money. And it's not against the law in Africa to steal money from an American. You're an attorney, so I don't know if that's true. It seems like that's true. So they can, send out these emails in mass. They don't have to target you. But something else you think about, you have these Chinese, they got like a platoon of folks in there. They're just trying to cause trouble. There's people that show up every day. They have their briefcase, but their suit and tie on. They show up there and they learn about your company. I do a lot of work with rural electric co-ops. So they're in Comanche, Texas. I'm not sure you know where that is, but I didn't until last year. And they said, well, we're just here in Comanche, Texas, so what do I have to be concerned about? And the fact of the matter is, you make money, you pay bills, you're a target. And they know who you are, they know who your bosses are, they know, what your web pages are, they know what IP addresses are associated with you, because that's their job. And that's what they're looking for. And where you are or how big you are doesn't matter anymore. So everybody's a target.
What would you suggest to a clerk at a rural electric cooperative that gets an email that says, we've commandeered your system because of this and this, and you have to pay us this amount of money? What should their first response be, and how should they proceed? We try
real hard not to get to that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll start. What we do to make sure they don't get to that point is we have tools in place. There's tools to make sure that doesn't happen. That ransomware requires a certain level of access. It requires usually older protocols to be running on your system. So you really encourage people to not run older systems on their computers. Make sure that things are configured correctly. So there's those things we can do at our clients to make sure that their risk of actually getting, even if they got the email and clicked on it, their risk of being infected is going to be much lower. And there's things that you can and should do.
Is that a very expensive investment?
No, well, it's not expensive necessarily in time. In money, but in time it is, because you have to patch your systems. You have to, well, there's some money because you can't have a Windows 7 computer on your network. You got to replace it. You have to replace it, or you have to patch it. And that winds up just being just busy work. And sometimes there's other things going on that IT people have to do. Their job is mainly to get the system up and running. It's working today. If I put a patch on it, it may not be working tomorrow. And that's not their job. Their job is to make sure it's working. So there's a incentive for the IT professional to not apply security because their job is availability. Obviously, because ransomware is also down, but they're a service organization. They're there to make sure that the computers are working and that people are able to use them. And it's not. And then we're also telling them, oh yeah, make sure that you're secure, but not telling them how to be secure. So then they wind up making decisions, and it's not fair to them. And it's because nobody's sat down, taken a risk-based approach to where are our risks, where are our data, how do we put programs in place, how do we train our people to not click on those things, what software do we put in to make sure that those emails don't get in, and if they do get in, what controls do we have to make sure that software doesn't blow the thing up. But it's methodical. It's not just, well, I got the software, let's turn on everything. It's something that takes some thought, and it's like all other risks. We have to determine how are we going to do this.
As we transition more and more to the cloud, I think a lot of people have concerns about everything accumulating in a more of a public cloud-based type setting. Is that something that's valid, or is it as secure as what we've been led to believe, do you feel?
I think that it probably is. Kind of think about things being on more than one level. You have the server things run on, then you have the software that runs on top of that. The cloud usually just is that base server part, and they make sure the patches are applied. They're monitoring usually for odd activity, and whether or not it's going to be more secure or less secure, my guess is that in most cases it's going to be more secure, because just because you can walk into a room and see the flashing lights does not mean that you're doing all your patching on time. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily monitoring for all the funny business that goes on, and that's what these folks do. They're just infrastructure providers. So if somebody asked me straight up, do I go to the cloud or do I stay here? And I know that they're not a large IT organization that manages things really well. I tell them to go to the cloud.
And their budget would stay consistent?
When it comes to money, I would say that they're going to have a larger outlay to go to the cloud, but there's costs to running your own servers as well. There's the hardware costs, right. But then there's that constant support. So you have to replace them every 3 to 5 years already, but the whole time you have them, you have to keep them patched. You have to make sure that they're cooled and in secure locations. So there's a lot of costs that go into making sure that you have a secure server and then internal to the network. You're basically taking that part of the risk and you're giving it to somebody else. And it's not just, I'm just trusting them also. They have external audits. They come in. There's SOC 2 reports and DFARS. FedRAMP is a way that the federal government makes sure that their cloud service providers are secure. So you can actually go to these organizations and say, what are you doing? And they come back and say, here's what we did. And we showed an auditor all these things that we did. And so you can actually feel pretty comfortable with a lot of these cloud service providers that they're doing all the right things because they're proving it to somebody every 6 months, every year, or what have you. And you have to be responsible and say, okay, I'm going to go to the cloud. I can't just say, wash my hands of it. You have some responsibility to see what they're doing, to verify that they're doing those things. Those reports come back and they say, well, we're going to make sure that this happens, but your responsibilities are these 10 things. Well, you're going to do those 10 things. They're going to say, well, we're going to secure your network, but you have to turn on the multi-factor authentication. You have to not share your passwords. You have to do these things, and that's what it's going to say. So you have some responsibilities, and they're going to tell you what those things are. So, if you're going to go to the cloud, go to the right cloud, do your research, and you should be good.
I think I figured out what multi-factor means.
Right. More than one thing.
It's just a multi-approach or a double protection.
It's something you know and something you have or that you are. So think about, thumbprint, maybe something you are.
Right.
I can argue whether that's really that. But, if I have my cell phone and I can get a text message on it, that's something I have. You can't log on there because the text message comes to me. And so those are the sort of those multi-factors that can get you on there. Like when you log onto your bank, you may not know it, but you had to pick that picture when you first set up. There's that picture of the alien or whatever, and that's your picture. That's a form of multi-factor. In fact, I think I'm making this number up, but I think there's something like there are 5 requirements, 5 factors you had to go through to get onto your bank. So you might have a PIN, you might have that picture, you might have an actual token you had to put in there. And that's one of these banking mandates. So not always is multi-factor always just getting a text message or getting that app. And a lot of these online companies are really pretty savvy at that. Banks, for example, they don't like it when people break into my bank account because depending on what it is, or if companies make wire transfers, they lose money. They don't want that to happen, so they're doing all these things to make sure that their customers are secure. And they've been doing it for years. So,
in Oklahoma, a lot of companies do government work, and I think that the numbers are growing from year to year. And I understand that a company has to be CMMC compliant to get a government contract. Can you explain what that means and what that entails for a company?
It is something they're rolling out now. It's not actually a requirement yet, but in the next 5 years, the DoD has put this framework into place, and it's an independent assessment. It's like an audit, but they don't use the word audit. It's an assessment, so you'll have to hire a third party to come out there and test your controls. So if they give you what they call controlled unclassified information, you have to do all these things to protect it. And this is basically, there's 130 things or there's different numbers of things depending on, or practices you have depending on what kind of data you have, and you have to then verify that you're doing that to a third party. They're in the process of getting all the companies lined up to do that right now. But what I find interesting is I think just as of last week, the Department of Homeland Security has now come in and they have indicated that they are looking into also requiring CMMC compliance for their contracts. So originally it's just the DoD, but now the other agencies like Homeland Security, in some cases GSA, who does a lot of the government contracting, they're going to require these things too. So it might wind up as being that de facto standard. If you have this type of data, you have to have this level of certification. Right. But they're rolling it out. There's just a few companies been selected. In my intro, they said that I'm involved in this thing. They've selected like 100 provisional assessors that were experienced and have done audits and things like that before. And they trained us, and now we're out there trying to roll these things out to the first companies. And we're out there helping companies build these programs. And it's a pretty significant mindset change. If you're level 3, there's 130 practices. And that's a lot. And there's no situation where I can say, well, I'm not doing this, but I'm doing this. There's none of that. It's a all or nothing, which is going to be very interesting because even the companies that do the assessments, like we're lined up to have our own audit. We had to pass the CMMC audit ourselves that the government agencies are doing. They've only had 3 companies pass that so far. And these are the companies doing the audits. So it's going to be a significant mindset change. They're either going to have to lower the standards or create some more risk-based approach. But one way or another, if you're doing government contracting, or you're in certain industries like critical infrastructure, like we do a lot of work with electric companies, oil and gas pipelines, for instance. They are going to be mandated to do certain things one way or another, and it's not going to be this tell us you're doing it thing. It's going to be do it, prove that you're doing it, and have somebody else come in there and verify that you're doing it. And that's going to be a significant mindset change.
Do you think that was sort of rolling before the Colonial Pipeline hack, or has that really ramped up since then?
I know that there's certain requirements that are being put out on pipeline companies, which is actually not something I can talk a lot about because the requirements that the TSA has put out is not public record. It's actually kind of clandestine, but there have been put requirements out on pipeline companies based solely on that the Colonial Pipeline incident. And the irony on that one is they want to really know about your critical infrastructures. They want to know how you're providing power, you're providing wastewater, you're providing water, all these systems they want to know about. But Colonial, it wasn't that. I mean, they never got on the pipeline system. They got into the billing system, and they weren't able to bill for. This is a gasoline pipeline, so I pull my truck up to the pipeline. I swipe my credit card, just like not really, but and then I fill up my tanker, and then I go fill up my gas station with it. Well, they weren't able to take payments, and it had nothing to do with the operation of the pipeline. So this is why this is such a big concern. They're not just focused on the critical infrastructure. They're saying, what are you doing to make sure that all the business systems you have in place are allowing you to actually operate your business? And that's where we get, because these SCADA systems are pretty secure generally. Mm-hmm. It's the other systems. It's the how do you bill for things? How do you schedule movements and things like that? And if those shut down, then you're dead in the water, and it's just the same thing as shutting down the actual turning off the lights. Do you think that the nature of our country, kind of being based on freedom and a wide open, so to speak, system, works to our advantage or maybe to our disadvantage, as opposed to a country more like China or that's more insulated and where the government has way more control over security? I think there's probably a certain amount of disadvantage in the fact that things aren't mandated. And I don't know how much the Chinese are dictating, that their companies follow certain standards, but they also are locked down. But we have a lot of freedom. We also don't really think that the government has any business coming and telling us how we need to be doing our business. And I also, personally, probably shouldn't say this, I don't think they're the most qualified to tell us how to do certain things. I mean, if you even look at the CMMC, which I'm pretty involved in, a lot of the people in charge of this have never actually had a job outside the government. And there's some very important things about companies that make money that operate differently than government institutions that you don't necessarily understand the risks associated with that. So I understand risks of losing my data, but I also understand there's a certain amount of risk of not being able to provide services to my employees or to my customers or just maximize my profits. And this is an important thing to me. And so I want to be able to make decisions on how do I protect my systems in such a cost-effective manner that I can actually still make money. Whereas lots of government institutions, they'll just we'll just pay for more people, we'll pay for more software. We as businesses, we have to make decisions, and I think that having the government coming in and saying, well, we've done it this way, like this way is really easy when you have unlimited budget.
Exactly.
And so that's kind of the when we have these conversations with folks, that we have to understand that we're going to tell them to do things. We're going to ask them, where are your risks? Where do we think your pain points are? And let's make those decisions on what's the best way to spend your treasure and your time. And then maybe next year we budget some additional things. And that's really how the traditional model of getting security going has been. I think the more and more the government gets involved, they're just going to say, nope, do this. And this is how much it's going to cost. And you're just going to have to charge the government more for you doing these things. So.
I wouldn't want you to identify any particular companies, but I wondered if either or both of you have had clients that have been victimized by ransomware attacks, and what your advice might be for protecting yourself against like an attack such as that.
So I've known of businesses. I haven't, because I do employment law, I haven't dealt with a business that was the victim of that. First thing I would do is give them Tim's number and say, call him, he'll help you out. But I have known of businesses, I've known of law firms that have been subject to ransomware attacks. And it was as simple as somebody clicking on a link in an email, and it should not have done that. And now this has been a few years, and so I think the systems have become more sophisticated, and the protections have become more sophisticated. But I don't know what happened there. I don't know what that law firm did to get out of that situation. But when you think about it, law firms are required to keep in confidence the information our clients tell us. And our clients tell us all kinds of stuff that's very important to them, and very important that it be kept confidential. So I know that it was a really big issue that was very important. And, it still comes back to this. We're very, very busy right now. We're looking at things with vaccines and face masking and social justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're looking at all kinds of very important things in the workplace. Cybersecurity cannot be put to the back burner. Cybersecurity has got to be moved to the front burner, because these people that are out there trying to do ransomware or trying to do some type of cyber attack, they're looking for companies with their guards down, and then they're going to attack those companies. And so it's just important to bring in the professionals, get the education and the systems you need, put the policies in place, and then spend the time with your employees to do the training. You asked that question about, the clerk at the power plant in Texas that hits the link on the email. Well, there needs to be a system in place, there needs to be a policy in place, and there needs to be training in place so that clerk knows better than to do that. And you know what I've learned and what I've heard, it's usually not the clerk that does it. It's usually the senior executive, because
The CFO.
it's the CFO because the clerk knows better. They've been trained, and they're like, I'm not going to hit that link. But it's the executive level people that think, oh, surely it didn't get to me with ransomware, and then they hit that link. So it's just something that needs to be the subject of a company's policy development and training, and put the time and resources into it.
Well, I think cyber hygiene is getting better. Employers are teaching their employees, and they go on to the next company, and we're just getting better at having those conversations. I have a few clients, in fact, I was there 2 weeks ago, where we just do training, for a week, where they bring in all the different employees, and we tell them what's been going on, and they don't know. I mean, they just don't necessarily know. One of my clients does a lot of work with SpaceX, but you would tell them that, because that might make them a target. Half the employees didn't realize that, so they didn't necessarily think of themselves as a target, and now they do. And we give them advice like, you're going to get these emails. What do you do? Well, here's how you do it. We have tools where we send them fake emails to test them. And I think a lot of folks probably have that system now out there too. Mm-hmm. And so not only are you getting used to looking for things that are funny, you are expecting them, so you're looking for them. And so there's just a lot of those sort of things that we're going in and having that end user training and teaching them things. So even just like some examples, one of the examples we have in this training was the CEO sent an email to this guy on a Saturday and said, hey, I need you to go down to the Walmart and pick up some Amazon gift cards. I have some story. I need you to scratch out the back and give me the numbers. Just gotta do that. Or they'll do this thing, oh, you gotta make this wire transfer for me. And so we go up there and say, look, if the CEO is not calling you during the week to ask you to do this, they're not calling you on the weekend to doing it. They're not sending you an email to tell you to do these things. And we go on and tell them, it's like, we are never going to ask you to approve a financial transaction over email. We're never going to do this. And so we just tell people, if it smells fishy, it probably is fishy, and we can't stop all the emails from coming in. And sometimes people's emails will get breached. That's one of the problems with being in the cloud. And so you'll actually get a real live email from the CEO. Somebody broke into their account. Now they're sending you an email. If it doesn't sound right, it's not right. And that's how these people get these wire transfers made and things like that. People are very afraid to question the CEO.
We had a story not long ago about a lawsuit that came about following a real estate transaction. And apparently one of the parties, the bad guys knew that this party was involved in a real estate transaction, and they came up with an email that looked like it came from the other part, the second party, and they sent them an email that says, please transfer this money to this account, and blah, blah, blah. And it looked legit, and that's how, they got scammed that way, and a lawsuit came from it. And I think the court ruled that the second party that the individual tried to blame wasn't to be held responsible, because nobody could really determine who was at fault for the original breach. But, can you just give advice to people who might think, well, I employ an IT professional, so I don't need to worry about this?
From what I mentioned before, hiring somebody else to do something for you doesn't allow you to just abscond your responsibility. And I also mentioned that IT professionals, whether it's somebody you hire or a third party, they're service organizations. Their main function in life is to make sure that you're not calling them. Your computer turns on, you can do your work. And especially people that, traditionally I think they were getting a lot better, but a lot of these companies, they will get complaints. At least these did in the past. If I come in and say, hey, no, you have to have a 12-character password, and they're like, oh, no, I never want to change my password. And since I'm a service organization, I'll be like, okay. And that's not the right decision to make. But the person who needs to make those decisions aren't the IT guy. It's not the IT organization. It is your management. It's your risk management function. I need to tell you, as the executive, of this company, or as the board, it's like, we will be secure. We will have 12-character passwords. We will do these things. Because if you leave it up to somebody who's there to make you happy, they're going to make you happy. But the problem with it is, I'm a CEO or a CFO of a company that makes widgets. I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I assume that my IT people are, and that is not a good assumption to make. Not all IT guys are security experts, just like not all IT guys can write a software program, and not all IT people can, patch a server. There's a lot of different roles, and cybersecurity is more of a risk function. It's a risk management function, and it's not something IT people do. That's something that risk management people do. And so if you aren't thinking in your overall risk management strategy, the same strategy that says, how do we price our widgets, or how do we go to market with this product? Do we choose not to go into this industry? Those same decisions need to be included in that when you're making cybersecurity decisions. Are we going to go to the cloud? What are the risks going into the cloud? If we do go to the cloud, what questions do we need to ask? What do we need to do to verify those things? Those are all things that you don't come out of the womb knowing. You have, and the IT guys don't necessarily know that either. So I think there's part of the problem is just people are making assumptions that other people are making decisions, when in all actuality that it's not. And so as we usually spend a lot of our time doing when people consult with us, is we talk about what their risks are, and we talk about what their policy should look like. And we talk about how we enforce those policies. And that's really boring stuff that nobody wants to do. And that's why they don't get done sometimes. So, but it's an overall thing. If you know what your risks are, you can properly plan for them, and that's what you need to do.
I think we may be nearing our end, but I thought maybe I'd ask for some comments from both of you about, to comment a little bit about small versus large. We know that the Boeings and the Devons and other large corporations of the world are pretty sophisticated and know that they need to plan ahead, have written policies, have budgets in place, and to guard against cyber terrorism and COVID navigation and all that. But what about smaller? How small does a company have to be before they don't have to worry about being targeted or not having to worry about a lawsuit that might derive from someone that doesn't want to be vaccinated or doesn't want to wear a mask? Can you just kind of offer some closing comments about small versus large planning?
I'd say from a cybersecurity standpoint, if you make money, you're a target.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. Now, might your solution be a lot more simple than Devon's? Probably. It's that those things are going to change along with that. But there are certain things, if you have certain kinds of data, if you're in certain industries, people are always looking for medical stuff, and you also have a lot of reporting requirements if you do get breached. And I know very small companies that deal in some really sensitive information. But then you also know really large companies that don't do anything particularly secure at all. So I would say that size probably isn't the biggest factor, but it does. The amount of money you have does affect what you can do.
So it's the same thing from my perspective. If you're a business and you make money, you're a target for a lawsuit. It's just the way it is. Doesn't matter if you have one employee or if you have 1 million employees. And it's the same thing. It's the same risk. The more employees you have, well, the more HR representatives you'll have, the more policies you'll have, the bigger your budget will be for training. But you just need to have a plan. So I went on a fishing trip on vacation this summer, and it was a off-coast fishing trip. We were actually fishing for sharks. It was so much fun. Small sharks. But the captain of the boat said his life philosophy is have a plan. It doesn't always work out, but have a plan. And I thought, it really is that simple. So it doesn't matter if you have one employee. It doesn't matter if you have 1 million employees. Have a plan for cybersecurity. Have a plan for how you're going to respond to the pandemic and what's coming in the next 3 months. Have a plan and be ready to adjust and be flexible with how you approach the different challenges that come up. But think about things and put a plan in place so that you take the best prevention possible, and you're not subject to cybersecurity, and you're not subject to employees filing lawsuits, and then just do the best job you can to communicate with your people. That's the other thing that businesses and employers have the biggest problem with, is just not having the right level of communication with their employees. Just communicate.
Well, I appreciate you both taking the time to communicate with us today. It's been a real pleasure visiting with you. I've learned a lot, and I hope that our program's been beneficial. I'm reminded that people will be able to click on to journalrecord.com in the next week or so if they want to check out a recorded version of what we've been talking about. And I would just thank you all for attending, and we'll try it again at some point in the future.